voice17104.com. This is Zanetta Wingfield, and you're listening to the voice17104.com. The voice17104.com.
Not yet.
Welcome to Did You Know podcast, your host, Richard Utley, dedicated to the African American viewers. The program is aimed to celebrate African American culture and deal with the real and relevant topics that impact the everyday lives of the African American community through frank and insightful dialogue with local and national influencers. Every day, there is another horrible, discouraging news story, directly or indirectly, impacting African Americans. But we need to look at the shining stars in the galaxy of Black America. It is time to tell our story.
Good evening, and welcome to another Did You Know? Well, we just got through with Juneteenth. So what did you think about that? You know, that is supposed to be a day that we should be celebrating. But at the same time, we have a lot of people in our community that's not celebrating. They're being violent. And that bothered me to see so many shootings all over the country this weekend. We should be celebrating, not trying to kill each other. And I'm going to start my program off with a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois. We cannot stand still. We cannot permit ourselves simply to be victims. And I want you to think about that. Because I've been saying for so long, it's up to us in our community to try to put a clamp on this. Gun violence. Can anything, anywhere stop the madness? We have to ask ourselves that. When it comes to gun control, the people have spoken. The problem is for no one in the position of power. Are they bothering to listen to us? You know, they keep bringing up the Second Amendment, but I would require all of you, I would ask all of you, just look up the Second Amendment, because they throw that word around, they throw that amendment around, and I don't think it's what most people think it is. So I would hope that we in our communities just continue each day to stop some violence. If we just save a life a day, we will be better off. And I keep saying I don't want to talk about violence, but this seems to steamroll. So I'm going to leave you with a couple things. Did you know that homicide has impact on everyone? You may not think it has an impact on you because it may not directly affect you. You know, the costs are broken in 3 groups. Because immediate costs, hospital treatment, ambulance, police response. Who do you think pays for that? You pay for that. Maybe they can't afford the cost of the hospital. Maybe they can't afford the ambulance or the police response. You as a taxpayer is paying for a lot of that. You have insurance is paying for the hospital. So you do have a direct cost on that, which you may not be aware of. So think about that. And guess what? There's a future cost. Long-term physical and mental health care, institutional care, lost wages due to disability or death or criminal costs. Who do you think's paying for that when they go to trial? What about when someone gets shot and they can't no longer work anymore? Who do you think pays for that? Or if they're in a mental or healthcare facility, who do you think is paying for that? I don't think they can pay for it. So you got to pay for it. And the third one is the quality of life. pain and suffering throughout the victim's life as well as the families. So we have to take a long, long, long look at this and realize that homicide impacts every last one of us. So as we walk around and we see things on TV and we don't think it affects us, it does affect us. So let's try to do a better job. We have to. Because if not, we'll just keep killing ourselves. I get tired of people asking me, why do we do what we do? And I hate that statement because sometimes it paints our community, because it affects the whole community. And that's why I think it's important for us to tell young people that we care about them. We need to say, have a good day. We need to let them know that their lives are very valuable, because the bulk of it is young people. You know, you want to go to a restaurant and you want to send your kids to a party, or you want to go to the grocery store. You're not looking to get shot. So those of you who have some say, those of you who have some guidance, let's start encouraging people in our community that their lives is valuable. But I'll say this, violence has no color. So it's not just the African American community, it's all over. We got people shooting people up because of the color. We got people shooting people because they don't like the gender that they picked or the religion. We got some problems in this country. And I will say that we have some major problems, but I think the whole idea needs to be human life is so important to everyone. Everyone. So the other thing I said to you is that each program I'm going to give you some history that I want you to look up, because we don't know our history and we don't try to know our history. So I'm going to throw out 3 names and I want you to Google it and do some research to find out who they are, because I've shared with you that we need to tell our story and realize there's a lot of people that have been paved the way for us in our community. So the one I'm going to give you first is Richard Allen. Many of you will know who Richard Allen is, and many of you have no idea who Richard Allen is. But look it up. Find out who Richard Allen is. Thurgood Marshall. Many of you will not know who Thurgood Marshall is, but it'll be very important for you to know who Thurgood Marshall is. And we'll say Medgar Evers. Who is he? These are icons that I think that we need to start paying respect for and honor in terms of who they are. We have a lot of very prominent people that have led us, and we need to find out who they are, and we need to find out what they're about. And I'm going to leave you with one other thing before I start my program. Since I talk so much about history, I would give all of you an assignment, and think about it. Just look at your community where you grew up at and find out a little bit of history about the community that you grew up. And I think you will be very surprised at some of the things that you will learn. You will find there were some very prominent people in your community where you grew up at, but you will find some other things as well. And I think that's where we should start at. We should start right in the neighborhood that we live in, or that we grew up in, or that we were born in, to do some history. Because I am totally convinced we need to know our history. And now we got all of these things of people don't wanting to know our history. I think that then we need to take the responsibility to do our own due diligence to find out about history for ourselves. Well, tonight I'm bringing on the gentleman that is always on with me when we do politics. Sometimes he takes the show over by himself, and sometimes me and him. is Tony Ross. And most of you know Tony because Tony has been a political person that has studied and understands the politics, not only local but national. And sometimes I think it's good for us to get our own perspective and talk about politics or how we perceive politics, because sometimes how we see things, other people may not see them. Because I am a big believer that we need to look out for our own vested interests and see what's going on, because that's the way politics is. I tell people that all the time. If you don't understand politics, then you need to understand one thing. If nothing else, politics is very local. It's local. So when you don't get your garbage picked up, or when you don't get your street cleaned, or when you feel that somebody is not responding, whether it's the police or the fire or whoever, when you feel that they don't respond, then where do you go? You go down to City Hall and you complain. Some of you complain, or you just complain, period. But I think that politics is so important, and it's local. And even I get concerned sometimes when I realize that we allow things to just slide past us. And I don't think we can do that anymore. I don't think you can let it slide past you. I don't think you have to let government slide past you anymore. I don't think you have to let schools, if you have kids in school or you have grandkids in school and you don't like the way that the process is, then you need to go in and be heard, and be heard for positive things. Because a lot of times, a lot of you get upset with me because you say to me, well, what about this? What about that? My point is this here. We need to be concerned about everything. Those of you who run up there, school districts, because you care about sports, then those of you need to run up there to care about, to make sure that our kids can read and write. So Tony, we got a lot to talk about tonight, so I'm gonna let you kick it off. So you got it.
Well, what do you want to start with? You want to start with the state or the national government?
Let's go with national. Let's go national, and then we'll go to state. Let's go with national first. What is your perception of where we are in national politics right now?
Well, it's very interesting. I think what's interesting the most is the Supreme Court, which you talked about earlier, you and I were talking about earlier, which will be coming down with a number of important decisions, and made some important decisions last week. And I think it's an important time to talk about judges. Last week, I believe it was, or I believe it was last week, the Supreme Court, in a surprise decision, voted in favor of voting rights, and said that the state government of Alabama illegally drew congressional seats in their election, and they have to redraw them. So that's a very important decision for not only for Alabama, but for all other states, and could have an influence on our elections going forward in 2024.
Well, that's very true. But we know that one of the things that's coming up is the whole idea of affirmative action. And
Right.
most believe that the Supreme Court will probably rule on that this Thursday. They're
Okay.
looking at Thursday. And most people believe that the Supreme Court will throw out affirmative action is in terms of how colleges and jobs and things of that have been used in terms of affirmative action. Now, unfortunately, affirmative action have been beaten up, dragged all around, and there's been people that have been products of affirmative action act like they weren't a part of affirmative action. I don't think anybody's ever tried to articulate that affirmative action was for you to put somebody in and didn't know what they were doing. I think
Right.
what affirmative action was supposed to do was try to help you to be on a fair playing field. And but it didn't end up being that. And one of the things that people better understand, it may have an impact on African Americans, but it's also going to have an impact on women. And sometimes they don't understand that. They just think affirmative action means that you want to hire a qualified somebody that can't do the job. So I would think that if that happens, I think what needs to happen then is that organizations, companies need to figure out the balance, how to create a fair and economical workforce, or even colleges, so that people can get a better idea of what's going on in life. Now, I might be wrong in that, but what do you think about that?
Well, I think you make a very important point, Richard. Number one, the number one beneficiary of affirmative action is white women. Most people don't know that. So, to somehow, that some people on the right like to go about saying that somehow Black people or Latino people or Asian people are benefiting. It's really a misnomer at this point. And I think what we want to do is work with the companies and the universities to work on other ways that we can adhere to the decision that we believe is upcoming, to ensure that we have equitable people getting the jobs and the right people get their jobs.
I mean, I would admit to anybody that, am I a product of affirmative action? I would say yes, I was. But I like to believe in my own mind that I didn't need it. I could have, if I would have had the opportunity of it being a fair starting line, I like to believe that I could have started the same line and it would have been equal. I might have got an opportunity. But I also know that that wasn't always the case. That wasn't always the case. And so now we need to figure a way how to prepare for what the court is getting ready to do. Now we see this in all kinds of things, not just in affirmative action, but a lot of things has been gutted for all the wrong reasons. I'm not saying that we should be responsible to create a fair and just system, and it has not been a fair and just system.
No question, Richard. I mean, we look at it throughout history, and what you're saying is so very true. We know, we've given the opportunities, Black people can compete, Latino people can compete, Asian people can compete. The problem has been often that the opportunities are not afforded to us. I think what you're saying is absolutely right.
But I think people need to understand that. I think that the problem is that our society has allowed the brush to be painted in a way. It's been painted negative, and I think that that's why we have to make sure that we tell the correct story, so that we can make sure that everybody understands. Because if you remember, one of the real issues that nobody talks about is this whole thing of the way back, when people try to tell people you didn't get the job because somebody else took the job. That is
Right.
all problem. That is this whole issue with this whole thing with immigrations. Everybody is trying to say we don't want people to come over here because they're taking our jobs. That is not true, because most of the jobs that they were going to work, most Americans would not do the job anyway.
Right.
But in their mind, they believe it's taken away from them. One of the real things is they were saying is that if you remember, President Eisenhower talked about the industrial complex, and he said, be wary of the industrial complex in the long run. And the whole concept was all that you put people together. Poor people are poor people. I don't care what color you are. If you're poor,
Right.
poor. So stop breaking it down saying that group over there is poor and I'm not poor. You're all in the same bucket. And that's why I get upset when people don't sit back and look at their vested interest. You get hung up on a concept. I'm not for Medicare, or I'm not for this social program. You're not for what reason? Because I think the minorities is getting the benefit. No, all of you are getting the benefit. And you need to understand that. If you don't have health care, it affects you. If I don't have health care, it affects me. But in the long run, it affects the whole economy, because if we all sick, none of us can go to work at all.
And I think, Richard, you make an excellent point talking about what affects the economy affects everybody else. And in particular, I'm thinking about artificial intelligence. And really, some economists out there believe that within 20 years, most jobs that are available today will not exist, because people they have artificial intelligence will be available to do those jobs. So we got to look at. I think the point you make, that it's not people taking your job, or a group of people taking your job. We got to look at the bigger societal forces that are involved.
Oh, there's no question about that, because we're seeing it now. I hate to say this, many of you who you work at home, that's a great thing. But at the same time, some businesses are saying, well, you got to be careful now, because later on, they'll have robots answering the phone. They don't need, well, they do it now. They
Yep.
don't even in companies you call in America, you call somewhere and you can't understand, because they're not hiring you here in America. But do we get upset by it? Do we scream about it? Do we say, hey, you need to have all those call centers in America, not in another foreign, but in America? But do we? Nope. But then we hang on little things like, well, affirmative action. Let me tell you, I should have gotten to school, and he got into school because, or she got into school because they were whatever. But I'm saying, if you have an issue with it, but why did we have an issue with it? Because we didn't start on the starting line fair. And people need to understand. So Supreme Court has been very interesting, and it will continue to be interesting. And I was reading somewhere the reason that the court went the way it went on the Alabama case is because the Chief Justice is trying to figure out a way to stop having the Supreme Court in this day and age be so politicized. Yes. I mean, I'm very politicized. And in the past, people used to think that the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, that people could go in a room and sit and talk and have a conversation and come to some kind of consensus. Now it's very obvious that everybody knows that the court could be very conservative, know it's going to rule very conservative, and pretty well can guess how the judges are going to vote. Even though when they go through the confirmation hearings, they say, well, I don't know, it hasn't come up yet, I don't know how I will feel on that. And now we come and find out they have already embedded their philosophy of which way they're going to go, regardless of the argument.
Yep. And it's so funny, because in the case of Alabama, you would think, and you know this to be true, Richard, it was pretty much standard discourse amongst the judiciary that you couldn't just pack all voters of one race into one district, which was basically what they were doing in Alabama. So, we hope that this new decision will expand opportunities for others to participate in the process.
Yeah, that's true. But let's take it a little step further. Let's move it out of the Supreme Court and let's just move it to the states. And we can look at the states and see all these rights are being knocked down, all these voting rules is being changed. And so my point is that they're doing that. And since we know they're doing that, then we have a responsibility to stay on top of it. That's my real issue. That's why I think we should have this conversation, because what happens is we see it happening, but we wait till the horse goes out the barn and down the road, and then we say, whoa, we lost the horse. You got to prepare. We have to prepare, and we have to prepare. You got to prepare now, 2024. You got to prepare for all these things, because one of the things that we will change the subject, but one of the things I people have to say, I always say short game and long game. The Republicans,
Right.
50 years, it might take them 50 to get where they really wanted to go, and they succeeded. Where Democrats have a tendency sometimes to want to short circuit things, and it ain't working that way. So we need to be mapping out strategy all the way for 2023, 2024 for the election coming. We can't wait till next January to start putting in preliminaries for how it's going to be in November of 2024. And
I agree.
the courts are not going to be there. Excuse me. As we talk here, what do you see that this country is going politically?
Well, I think again, it's really a fight for our lives. Really, when we get into abortion rights, when we get into voting rights, we're still fighting for basic civil rights. Really, when it comes right down to it, I think what you're saying, the abortion, the pro-choice people have done a really good job so far in raising their issue an important issue. So, I mean, they've won a number of state races, and really, I think the court is a bit reticent to take up any more abortion rights cases because I think they know if they rule in the eyes of the abortion rights people the wrong way, it'll incite them even more. I think the same thing with regard to voting rights, and I think that again, Democrats are being more ahead of the game on these things and are winning them more. So I think we got to understand what this is about. I like what some people have said on different shows who said, it doesn't matter your rights if you're trying to take your democracy from you. And I think that's really what it comes down to it.
So, and you bring up a point. So let me ask you this: we hear all this conversation about on the right, on the left, and in the middle. How do you see the pendulum of this country going right now? I mean, I tell people all the time, there's extremists on the Democrats, there's extremists on the right. I mean, on the Republican side, there's extremists on both. How do
Right.
we, some kind of way, figure out how we can come to a happy medium, if there's such thing, if we could even do that?
I think some people would say you look at the vote on the debt limit. You know, he was able to put together the president along with Speaker McCarthy was able to put together a package that allowed the people in the center to come together and give the majority of votes. In fact, it was over 100 votes it won by. Um, and you put the right, with the Freedom Caucus is one, the right on the right, and then the Progressive Caucus on the left, and they let them go to, vote or do what they do to voice their opinions against it. But the fact of the matter is we had to get it done, and they did. So I think that's a good way of thinking about how to do it. How do we get elected officials to think about things in terms of getting things done, as opposed to playing to the base, whether they be left or right, left or right.
I guess I'm troubled by a lot of comments I hear people say, and I'll give you an example. I've always thought government should be about good government and what's best for the people. Would you agree now it looks like we have become a group that wants to label a particular Democrat, Republican, and if you're a Democrat, I'm only going to vote for Democrat. If you're a Republican, I'm only going to vote for Republican, when it's not necessarily your vested interest. For example, I listened to Attorney General Barr on TV the other day, and he said some things good and some things that were not flattery about the former president. But at the end of all that he said, I would still vote for him.
Wow.
He said, I would still vote for him. Most of them, that's where they are. They're in that dilemma. They would still vote for him, regardless, or whatever. And I'm saying, isn't it about good government opposed to party? We have become so labeled on party. And that's why I'm very concerned that we as a group need to vote for people who's going to look out for our vested interests. I don't care if you're a Republican, I don't care if you're a Democrat. We gotta look out for our vested interests because we're getting whacked. So
Yeah,
what do
and
you
I think you make two good points, Richard. Number one, we have to come to a point in which we decide some things that make a candidate disqualifying. And I think what's important to us, what's going on right now, is what you said. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. I'm going to vote for them. And sometimes you shouldn't vote for a Democrat or you shouldn't vote for a Republican. And in particular, there are things that are disqualified. And then two, as you said just now, the voting in our own best interest. And sometimes, there are Republicans that are in our best interest, and sometimes there are Democrats in our best interest. But we've lost that. So I think we got to go back and build at the community level to teach people those basic facts. There are things that are disqualifying for somebody to be an elected official, and then two, what are our best interests and what are the issues and who are the people who are best equipped to help them achieve those missions.
I mean, that's why I think that one of the things we need to do a better job on, I think we need to do a better job on articulating that politics is local. And the reason I can continue to harp on that is because they can see that. You know,
Yes, I agree.
national politics is great. And we all want to be a part of national politics. But when it's really said and done, politics is local. And you have some control over that. You have some kind of control who's going to be the mayor. You have some kind of control who's going to be the council person. You have some kind of control who is going to run your schools. You have some kind of control. And we don't, and sometimes we just don't do anything about it. So I think maybe what we should do, and tell me if I'm wrong, maybe we should start to build from ground up.
Yes,
Because
absolutely. I agree.
we shoot for the thing. We'll say, vote for the president of the United States, and the average person say, well, it don't make no difference to me because they're going to do what they want to do, because I usually hear that anyway. So
Right.
maybe if we start to articulate and bring that message that local is so important. And that's why and I say that in terms of whether it's the mayor, whether it's the district justice, DJs, all those things are very important, but we have to participate. And I don't think we do participate. I think in school districts, at school board meetings, there's 2 or 3 parents go, or 4 or 5, and they usually go if they have a vested interest. If they have a vested interest, they're going up there for that. But we need to take hold of that. We need to hold our politicians accountable. And I keep bringing this up all the time, and nobody pays attention to me. We need to be very important on the judicial. That they affect your life. They affect it, whether it's a district justice, local level, or it's the common pleas court, the state Supreme Court. And my God, now we understand the Supreme Court. I mean, we need to understand those things. But I'm going to move on. So, is there anything else you want to say about national? We got a lot of problems. We can talk about them. And I'm just going to bring this up because it's a program about Did You Know? So I really want people to do their own research. I don't want people to listen to what I have to say, but do your own research. But I just have to bring this up. Now, there's this big thing about all these military promotions are being held up by
Yes.
one senator. He's holding them up on all kinds of things. And ladies and gentlemen, now how did he get so powerful? And probably you don't know who I'm talking about. So I'm gonna set it on one side, And I'm going to let Tony say it on the other side. Now, what was his claim to fame? Oh, he was a football coach.
Yes, he was.
So what? I mean, he was a football coach, and yet he is not as sensitive as everybody want to believe. And yet he had a lot of us made him be where he was.
Yes.
So what?
And now there's a guy from Ohio, Senator Vance, who's doing the same thing. It's the Department of Justice appointees are being held up.
I mean, they're holding up hostage to one man is holding up hostage to this country. Another man's holding up hostage to this country. Ladies and gentlemen, we got some problems, and we are allowing it. Even in my own district, my own congressman, some days I don't know what he's thinking, but we got to figure a way to hold people accountable. Reward those who support you, and you punish those that don't. And I understand, I'm smart enough to understand constituents because he knows who votes for him. So all of us out there who pose all that lip service and you don't vote, and you say it don't make no difference, right? It don't make no difference. Don't make no difference for you because you don't take the responsibility of going out and exercising your vote. And guess what? He knows it.
Yeah.
So I've been preaching getting out to vote and register to vote, and people should vote. And all the time people say, well, it doesn't really count. It does count. So since you don't believe that, I've now got a new strategy called let's build from the ground up. That's going to be my new thing. Let's build from the ground up, and let's do it locally. And I think if you do it locally, people can see results. They feel better. I do understand the frustration. You tell somebody to vote for what it could be the governor, it could be the president of the United States, and then they don't win, and you feel hollow. You feel like it didn't make no difference. So let's call it build up from the ground. All right, let's talk about state politics now. We got a lot to talk about. Let's talk about let's start with let's talk about the budget. And
Yes.
the budget has to be passed by June 30th. The Democrats are in control of the House, and they already passed the budget, and now it's over at the Senate, and you hear all kinds of things. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's a old school. Richard. They're playing a game with each other. The House Democrats together a budget that spends $2 billion more than the governor even spends, and certainly more billions than the Republicans are willing to spend. But I think the Democrats, who have a one vote majority and who have passed their bill by one vote, they know that this is an opening bid to the first part of the negotiations. So I think it will be interesting because there are a number of new senators and representatives around the budget table. As we know, there's really about 5 or 6 people who really determine the budget, and they go back out and tell the rest of the people to either vote yes or no. And I think for us, it's really been good because we have a number of African Americans who will be around the table. Our friend Senator Hughes from Philadelphia, who's been a long-time Democratic Appropriations Chairman. Representative Harris of Philadelphia is the new Appropriations Chairman for the House Democrats. Even though they're not really involved per se, but she will have a say. Representative McClinton of Philadelphia is also involved as well. So I think we're in the process now of getting the people together. The Senate is controlled by Republicans, so they'll have a different view of the budget when it comes out at their in their legislature, in their part of the legislature.
People always say to me, we know that the budget's supposed to be passed by June 30th, and a lot of times it's not, and it affects a lot of people. I mean, you would think that they could get it done, but they don't get it done for a lot of political reasons and haggling and this and who wants to give this up. And that's why, like you say, it goes back to who tells the story. And I think that the budget's an issue. Um, Another thing that people don't realize is that they're still trying to say that they want to make some determinations in terms of our voting rights in Pennsylvania. I don't think that's over. Do you?
No, no, not at all. And again, also they're waiting on. There's a lot of the money in the surplus, in the state surplus, which is a big issue of contention. I think that the state surplus is at $13 billion, but the Republicans, at least nationally, and then I guess also at the state level, they want to claw some of that stuff back. They want to give that up to wealthy people or more wealthy people who in the form of tax cuts. So that's another issue going on right now.
Well, I think that's why I think that's why my big issue. We don't tell the story. I mean, we've been hearing trickle down theory for the longest time, for years and years and years, and trickle down theory ain't worked yet. But yet we keep saying it. We keep giving tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. Even if you go back and you look at the whole thing with the epidemic, you got all these companies that got money that didn't need the money, but yet they'll hit the little 5 or 6 businesses or whatever and say, oh, they got $10,000, they got $20,000, but yet you got all these big corporations that took a lot of money.
Right.
Nobody brings their names up. Nobody talks about them.
Absolutely.
I mean, would you also, what do you think about this? Many of the people, especially in Pennsylvania, many people in several of the counties and people who ran for office, especially whether they ran for county commissioners, whether they ran for board of elections and things of that nature. You have quite a few that won, that will probably win in November, that will have a major impact on the election for 2024. Now, a lot of them lost, but we got some that
Yes.
is going to make a major impact of how Pennsylvania is looked at in the presidential election of 2024. So,
No question about that. Yep.
and people don't understand that. Yes, there are some people out there who said that the election was stolen, won, and guess what? Their attitude is not going to change. So to get elected,
Yes.
they're pretty well going to get elected in November because they're usually already in the counties that they pretty well know where they have the numbers at. And then 2024, they're going to be right here saying, "Oh, these votes." That's the problem with elections now. In the past, we would already accepted whoever won, whoever lost over all these years. And this time, that didn't happen. And I hate to say that the presidential elections in the United States is going to be different from now on. You're going to have
Right.
the not going to concede, and we're going to carry this all the way along. Even though people don't want to think about, and that's why I talk about history, people don't want to think about Al Gore and the Chad and going to the Supreme Court, and Bush becomes the president. Al Gore said that's what it was. He didn't fight it for the next 10 months. Some people thought he should have, but he didn't. He accepted what he thought was the will of the people, even
Yep.
though it was suspect in terms of the Supreme Court ended up determining the Chad. And a lot of people probably don't even forgot about it, don't remember it. And I just don't see those kinds of things anymore. I don't see a person conceding
No.
2 hours or 5 hours. I understand projections, whatever, but I just don't see it. Do you?
No, I think you're absolutely right. We see that in all sorts of races. So we're going to have a Senate race in 2024, and we're going to have Senator Casey running for the Democrats, and it appears right now Mr. McCormick will be the Republican representative running for Congress, for Senate, excuse me. But who was possibly going to run was Senator Mastriano, who ran for governor this last time. And he was definitely an election denier. And even though he was a bit more moderate, McCormick, he still said things that were concerning, Richard, about elections going forward.
And those things have to be, I'm going to use the word electric. Those people in Pennsylvania, in other states as well, you got to keep your eye on the ball because, it was just a minor stroke. The war is not over. The war is not in terms of this, and we need to understand that. And that's why I think it's so important that you need to know what's going on in your capitals. You need to know what kinds of laws they're being passed. Because there being all kinds of laws being passed out there, and you're walking around and not realizing that it will have an effect and will have an impact on you. Because like I just said, you got a number of people who were election deniers that won in the primary. They're going to win in the general election, and they're going to be the ones that when elections come, they're going to be the ones sitting in the room calling the shots. And we've been sitting around thinking nothing of it, but we need to plan for that in the long run now. So what do you think about people starting to build coalitions so that we can get our agenda across?
Well, I think, Richard, that's just something that we've talked quite a bit about over the years, and I think it's the way to go. We need to begin to start to build these coalitions from multiracial, multi-generational, multi-gendered throughout the campaigns to help issues that we think are important that you've just said. I think what's really been important that I've seen in our state and across the country is the gun control the groups who have come together and are running very effective gun control advocacy campaigns. So I think those are good a place to look at how we might structure them, how we might fund them. I think they would be good places to look.
No, I agree with you. What would you say that people need to get involved? Since let's just talk about, I said we're gonna start from the foundation. We're gonna go low and go up. So what do you think that people in communities should start to do in terms of becoming actively politically involved only for their vested interests? And I'm not talking about people trying to change the overall, but let's talk about how people should start getting involved. Would you agree people should start getting involved in the school districts? They need to go back and say, okay, what is happening in my district to make sure that my kids get a comparable education? Because one of the big movements is, and we keep sitting around, is that charter schools, like that. Now, we all know that when schools are funded, a school district is funded, and some people may not be aware of this. When a school district is funded, I'll just say a school district got, let's say, $4 million. Say their budget is $4 million. We'll say that. So their budget is $4 million. So they have all these charter schools, and the charter schools say is $1 million. Well, now that school district does not have $4 million. It really only has $3 million. So it affects the overall operation of the school and the school district, and people need to know that. And so a lot of people say they don't want to send their kids, especially to public education schools. They'll But I'm gonna say something, and people probably ain't gonna like what I say. But then we need to hold those public schools more accountable. We need to hold them accountable to make them do what they're supposed to do. But we need more teachers, we need more administrators, and unfortunately, right now, it ain't a good sign people wanting to be teachers because a lot of these young people are out of control. And I think that first of all, the parents need to take some responsibility. They don't. Some of them need to take responsibility. And so we need to start building to create a better school system for our kids. Because as you see, one of the big arguments is, and you see it all the time, we say that we need more funding for our kids. And the big blowback is, well, we keep giving you money, but what are we
Right.
getting? What are we getting from it? Well, we're supposed to be getting a lot, but we have to hold everybody accountable. And I think that's in everything. We have to hold everybody accountable. That's why earlier when I brought up the whole thing about homicides, that people don't realize it affects your pocketbook.
No
Because
question.
it wasn't your cousin, it wasn't your son, it wasn't your daughter, it affects your pocketbook. But we don't look at it that way because it's never presented to us that way. And
Right.
we start presenting things to let people know how it affects you. Now, there's probably
Yep.
some people who heard me tonight said, "Well, I never thought about that." Yes, yes, sirree.
Yep.
Um, that you're responsible for when somebody gets shot and the ambulance coming, the police coming, they investigate and they do all that. Well, who's paying the taxes to the police officers? You
Yep.
are. They're not thinking about, will that ambulance go down there? The ambulance driver has to be, the gas, all of that. Who do they think is paying for that? And
Yep.
then people that's in institutions, or they can't, or they have medical things. Who? Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, you pay taxes, you pay for insurance, you pay for a lot of things that a lot of people don't pay for. And it ain't your responsibility, ain't my responsibility, because they're supposed to carry their own. So homicides do have an effect on all of us. And we need to look at it that way. I don't think we look at it that way, but I think we should look at it that way.
No, I agree. And another place I would say a good place to people to start to get involved is number one with the recent state Supreme Court decision that they ruled that it's unconstitutional the way that Pennsylvania funds schools. So that means that eventually it'll probably mean more money will go to districts around the state. And then the question would be, as you just said, Richard, who gets the money? Who decides that? So I would say that's a great way to start.
I agree with you because a lot of people don't know. The big problem is that especially Pennsylvania wanted a lot of the money to go to outside of public schools. They want to fund other kinds of schools, and it takes
Right.
away from public schools, and people need to understand that because they need to understand that it has a rippling effect overall, and that's why we have to stay on top of our politicians.
And,
That's
and like you say, Richard, we can't forget, the way funds schools are funded is by wealth, really. So you suggest property taxes on your property, and say Harrisburg. So Harrisburg tries a bit, but if you go to Cumberland Valley, that's more expensive, and they have more money. So it's very interesting, Richard.
um. So, what do you think, and what do you think we should do politically right now? I mean, it's the summertime, and everybody gonna take vacations. Most people gonna take political vacations. I don't think we should, but most will take political vacations. So, what do you think we need to stay on top of?
I think this is the time to do the work before we do the work. So before the TV cameras come around, the real work is done in the summers, like we're talking about. So we have to go door to door. We got to do our research, and then when we'll be ready when the issues come to fore in next year.
I mean, I didn't realize that I started this movement. I got my own movement now. I started from the bottom so people can. I didn't, but I do realize that people want to see results. They
Right.
want to see results. And I think politically we never developed benchmarks before. Politicians will come in and tell you what they think you want to hear. And some
Right.
things they do, and some things we know they can't do. But they make promises that they can't keep. And I think that if nothing more from this program is that we have to deal with people who's going to look at our vested interests. That's number one. Number two, we got to stay on top of what's going on. There's a lot of things that's going on up at the Capitol, at all capitals, and they're passing bills and we don't know about it, and we need to understand it, because I keep telling people funding is very, very interesting. Just like people don't understand, there's talk about still cutting Social Security. They're still talking about cutting Medicare, Medicaid. They're still having conversations. Well, they're conversations, but if they come to reality, ladies and gentlemen, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
They're talking about moving, cutting Social Security. They're saying, well, we'll do this down the road. It will have an effect and an impact. Now, it may not have an effect and impact on me, but it's going to have an effect and impact on someone down the line. And I think that's what happens sometimes. I think we just flip it away. Well, Medicare, Social Security. And all I'm saying to anybody that's listening, and you can agree, I think you agree with this, Tony, you better think about your own vested interest, because
Yeah.
it affects you. Even though you don't think it affects you, it affects you. And if it don't affect you, it may affect somebody in your family. And that's what usually happens. It may not affect me, it may not affect you, so we don't think about it. But then later on, when your aunt, your uncle, your cousin, your son, and your nephew, all of a sudden, it hits you. So you gotta stay focused all the time and understand what might not affect you today may affect you tomorrow. So Tony, we're getting ready. Time is moving so fast. So what do you want to say to the audience in your own political philosophy before we go?
I would just like to say to the audience, thank you again for inviting me and Richard into your homes. And I would say, stay woke. We heard a lot about woke, and and it's supposedly a bad term, but woke, I think, in a way, is a good term. And I think if you stay woke about the issues that are important to you and your people, that would be the most important thing that you could do.
I'm going to leave my audience with this. Please, you got to stay on top of things. We got to stop just accepting everything for granted. We got to look out for ourselves. We have to make sure what's our vested interest. Because I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, the pendulum is tick-tocking back and forth. And you can see where this country's going. And, if you don't like it, then what are you going to do about it? Then how do you change it? You change it at the ballot box. Okay? That's where you change it at. I know some of you say, oh, yeah, I hear you. But that's where you change it at. Because we have to make everything and everybody accountable. And if we don't do that, see, right now, I've made a decision. There's a lot of craziness going on. You got all these people running for the Republican Party for president. Then you got maybe one or two just running on the other. But real quick, I just thought of something before we go. What do you think about my man running for president of the United States, Cornel West?
He can run. I don't know if he'll be able to get on all 50 ballots across the country. He can run. I don't expect that he'll win, but I think that's all I can say. He has the right to run.
I understand he has the right to run. I understand he's running on the third party, which is a very hard party to win. But the issue becomes this. What he wants to accomplish is a voice. Does that voice that he's trying to accomplish supports or hurts the process of who becomes the president of the United States? I'll leave it at that. And I think you know right where I'm going. We saw this in other presidential elections where third party or Green Party had ran and taken votes away from somebody that maybe could have been the president of the United States. So now, Cordes, he's in the way. I'm saying he's in the way. If he has an agenda, by rights, say it, be a part of it. But don't be a problem. Help to be a solution. Anybody can run for president. Anybody out there, you can run. But what is your agenda and what are you trying to accomplish in the long run, not short term?
And you're right, Richard. Those are the questions that will be posed to Cornel West. I don't think the questions will be, the answers will be particularly exciting to people who he would be trying to get, but we'll see.
I just want him to know you have the right to run for president of the United States, but are you hindering or are you helping? If you just want to be about a message, please do. Because your message, some of the things you're saying are absolutely correct and should be said. And maybe that's the platform that he feels he needs to say them on. But in the long run, is it going to be a help or a hinder? And we'll leave on that. Thank you. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you for joining the Richard Utley Show on The Voice 17104. We will be here on The Voice 17104 every first and third Tuesday from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Once again, thanks for viewing. Remember to visit us on Facebook at Richard Utley, and we welcome your questions and or comments.